So defining a funding round is broadly in a number of steps. So it's all in step one, and within that there are a number of sliders on the platform where you define different parts of the funding round and company. So the first is round specific, and if you scroll to the bottom, you can see there's a further 6 items. So there's 7 in total. We're going to walk through each of these individually and talk through what the settings mean. The first is very, very kind of high level general stuff on the company. Some of these further items down here really dive into the weeds. So we're talking very esoteric, very specific points relating to the funding round. But let's walk through round specifics initially, and then we'll walk back through the other sections as well. So the first item on round specific is around, do you want to generate paperwork for a specific investor? This is really useful if you have a named investor who is in this list here. So if you're taking money from, Angel Investors Bristol or Fuel or SFC, whoever it happens to be, you would select that specific investor type in the window here. And a couple of things happen if you do that. So let's click on Fuel Ventures, for example. You can see then that some of the items on the platform are locked. So Fuel Ventures have told us that they have very specific requirements of the paperwork. If they're going to invest in you, then they will want your paperwork to be balanced, for example. So you get no choice other than to choose balance. That setting is gone, and whatever Fuel has mandated appears there. Of course, if you don't agree with that setting and you're not going to accept it, you can walk away from Fuel. But if you want their investment, then you either need to accept that setting, or at least you need to go and negotiate with them so they can change it. It's worth mentioning at this stage, if you select a specific investor type like Fuel Ventures, then there may be some other paperwork that changes in your documentation. So it's not just settings that are changed here. Sometimes there will be some other, usually very minor settings that change throughout the documentation to be specific to that investor. For the rest of this session, we're going to assume that we don't have a specific investor type because it locks parts of the functionality away that I want to show you. For most people, no, I don't want a specific, this is the generic, I just want normal paperwork. The second choice here is around the balance of the paperwork on the platform. And broadly, there are 3 choices here. There's founder friendly, there's investor friendly, or there's balanced. My very strong recommendation would be to select balanced here. Maybe if you're doing a family and friends round, then then you would get away with having founder friendly paperwork. Most sophisticated investors would identify that you've selected founder friendly and would push back, and it's just a awkward way to start negotiation, really. So for virtually all scenarios, we would recommend you choosing balanced. And again, if an investor's not forcing you to select investor friendly, then I wouldn't go out of my way to select that without an investor insisting upon it. We do have, there's a link just above that item, which walks through in quite some detail the settings that are changed when you change that from founder friendly to balanced to investor friendly. For 99% of our customers, they remain on balanced, and for, I think that is entirely the right choice. Pre-money valuation, I'm not going to dive into this too much. This is the valuation of your company pre-funding. So sometimes people get confused. There's 2 different values you could put here. One's your pre-money, one's your post-money. Broadly, your post-money is your pre-money valuation plus the investment. So I don't know, if you're raising $500,000 at a 1.5 million valuation, then your pre-money would be 1.5 million, your post-money would be 2 million. The problem with talking post-money at this stage is you really don't understand what your post-money is going to be, because you don't know if you're going to raise exactly 500,000 or you're going to raise 400,000 or 600,000. So at this stage, your pre-money valuation shouldn't change, but your post-money may change depending on the dynamics of your funding round. The next item is advisory only. So this is indicating to your investment what the minimum ticket size is. So if you don't want to deal with hundreds of people on your cap table, you may say a minimum ticket size for this funding round is £5,000. And it's just telling your investors, it's indicating to your investors, you're not going to accept an investment of £4,000 or whatever. Now, actually, in reality, the platform doesn't enforce this. So if you do find somebody who wants to put £2,500 in and you agree, then the platform isn't going to prevent you. It is really, the purpose of this is putting an indication on the term sheet rather than enforcing the funding round in any real way. The next is a minimum aggregate investment amount, or what is the minimum you're going to raise. And again, this is an indication rather than being mandatory. So the platform doesn't enforce this today. So if you say we're going to raise £150,000, for example, and if you close the funding round at £100,000, so you've finished shy of your goal, the platform isn't going to stop you from doing that. And as long as all of your investors are happy that you've raised less than your minimum amount, then the funding round will close as normal. The platform's not going to prevent you from doing that. Again, the next item is maximum aggregate investment amount in this round. This indicates how much you're going to raise as a maximum in this funding round. Again, the platform doesn't enforce this. So if you say, it currently says £250,000, if at the last minute when you're about to close your funding round, somebody commits another £50,000 on top of the 250, so you get £300,000 committed, the platform is absolutely not going to prevent you from locking the funding round. And it's up to each of your investors to decide whether they accept that or not. But yeah, the platform, this is kind of advisory within the term sheet again only. The next button is hopefully self-explanatory, but is EIS available? You tick this if EIS is available within your current funding round. So for whatever reason, if your business isn't SEIS, EIS compatible, or if you've used all your EIS or whatever, then you would indicate no here. If you do intend on issuing EIS shares, then you would indicate yes on this screen here. The next item is exactly the same for SEIS. So is SEIS available? If you intend on offering SEIS within this funding round, then select yes. If you've already used all your SEIS, or if you're out of time for using SEIS, or you're not eligible for whatever other reason, you would select no here. But for most businesses who are offering SEIS, you'd absolutely click yes. The next item, do you have advance assurance? You would select this if you are offering SEIS and or EIS and you've received advance assurance from HMRC. If you're in that awkward phase where you know you want to offer SEIS, EIS, but you haven't yet had the response back from HMRC, or you've not built your advance assurance submission, then you would just indicate this as no at this stage. The next item is proposed round close date. Again, this is advisory rather than mandatory. This is where you would indicate, we intend on closing the funding round on whatever the date is. If I try and save this form right now, the platform's going to complain because we're indicating a date which is in the past. So we will say we intend on closing the round on the 1st of December. The platform is not going to stop you from closing a funding round either before the 1st of December if you manage to do that, if you close your round earlier, or if the round drags on into January or whatever. Again, the platform isn't going to complain too much other than potentially on this screen, but it's not going to prevent you from closing the funding round. The next section, so the next four boxes are all around agile fundraising. So these four boxes are all relating to any fundraising you want to raise in an agile funding round after this funding round is closed. But it's got nothing to do with what you're closing now. It's about an potential agile fundraise, which happens after you close this funding round. And lots of people say, well, I'm going to reduce this to 0 and we don't want this. Honestly, it gives you more flexibility to leave, even if you don't use it, and maybe if you don't intend on using it, it gives you more flexibility. This is a founder-friendly thing to do, to leave the door open, just in case you close this funding round and somebody turns up and says, great, I want to put another £50,000 in at the same valuation. If you've left Agile open, you can make use of it by opening an Agile funding round. If you haven't, then you need to jump through some additional admin hoops to do that. So this is a good thing from a founder point of view, even if you're not sure if you'll need it or not. So the first thing you indicate here is how much you're fundraising, and we'll say, right, we're going to raise £300,000, for example. You put the minimum price per share, and already the platform has calculated the current price per share in the current funding round. And then under here, it's worked out that in order to raise £300,000 at the current share price, it's this many shares. So it's kind of done the hard yards on calculating the maths. And then you need to indicate to your to the people signing the shareholders agreement when the agile deadline will close. So we know when we intend on closing the current funding round here, and we can say, well, actually, we intend on closing the agile. We're going to do it on the, I don't know, 1st of October 2026, maybe. So the three protections for your um, investors when they're signing the shareholder agreement under the agile authorization are firstly within the shareholders agreement. Broadly, we are saying once we have closed this funding round that you're signing off, the founders are also allowed to raise up to £300,000 at a minimum share price of 98.81, blah, 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 up until the 1st of October 2026. So, and the reason why those three parameters matter for me as an investor, firstly, as an investor, I want to know the maximum you can raise under this agile authorization. If you're doing an initial round of 150 and you then say, I want to raise up to 3 million under agile, well, that's going to have a really dilutive effect on me as a potential investor. So actually, that's unreasonable. I want to bound how much you can raise in agile. I don't want it to be kind of open-ended. Secondly, I want to make sure that the minimum share price within the agile funding round is no less than what I've paid. If I've already paid £98.81, I don't want you selling shares after that to somebody who's following on in an agile funding round. So that's a protection for me as an investor again. And then I want a kind of end date on when I can sell those agile shares until. What I don't want as somebody authorizing this agile round is, you can raise for the next 5 years at exactly the same share price that this funding round close at, because in theory, at least, the share price over time should be increasing. You should be spending the amount, you as a founder should be spending the money that was raised in order to further the business over that time. So that's why there's a deadline on how long agile can be used. So those three things, the total number of shares to be issued, the minimum share price, and the date the agile round close, are very standard protections for investors and other shareholders that are about to sign off this shareholder agreement. The last item on this page is whether you want to create a employee share option plan or an unallocated option pool, as also known. If you do want to do that and you're doing it either during or after a funding round, you can select that here. So you can say, right, we want the authority to create an unallocated option pool of up to 15%. You don't need to use this setting. So if you're creating an option pool before the funding round, which lots of investors will insist you do, then you don't need to use this as well. You just create a 10% before and then leave this empty. But within our funding round documentation, within the shareholders agreement specifically, you need to indicate to your investors what your company trade's going to be, so you can enter whatever is appropriate here. And you can see that this wording that we're entering in this box forms part of a bigger sentence. So the sentence is, business means blah, 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 as more fully described in the business plan. So the blah, blah, blah needs to be replaced by whatever your business trade is. When do you plan on exiting the business? This is not an obligation, so nobody is going to legally hold you to this, but it's really just an indication to your investors, whether you intend on exiting 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whatever it happens to be. Nobody can legally hold you to it. If you have indicated that you're running, that your funding round includes SEIS and EIS investors, we'll actually drop any mention of this from the shareholders agreement. If you include wording like, the founders intend to exit the business within 5 years, sometimes HMRC can spot that and they'll raise a query. So we drop that from the shareholders agreement anyway, just because it can cause problems. Like I say, you're not going to be held to it in any event, so don't overthink that one. We then ask you what restrictive covenant territory is appropriate. So each of the founders, when they sign up to FounderCatalyst, we produce paperwork for you like a founder service agreement, and you have other restrictive covenants that are detailed in the shareholders agreement. One of those restrictions is around, if you leave the business, it's a fairly standard protection for shareholders that you can't just create a competing business for a certain period of time. So we ask you for a restrictive covenant territory so that bounds where you can't create the business, if that makes sense. So it will say you can't create a competing business within the United Kingdom within, over the next 2 years or whatever the period is. So it really bounds what territory you're restricted from competing in. United Kingdom is usually appropriate unless, if your startup is worldwide, it may be worldwide, or it might be, very regional. If you're opening I don't know, paddle courts in Hampshire, for example, this may be changed to Hampshire because an investor may think, well, actually, if you open a paddle court in Humberside, it's hardly going to impact on this business. So it's really very specific to the business, but usually I think UK wide is a fair balance. The last item is very rarely used. This is around allowing flexibility of dividend payments across share classes. So founders love the idea of creating, if you've got two founders, you'll create ordinary shares for investors, and you create one class A ordinary shares for one founder, B ordinary shares for the other founder. And what that in theory allows you to do is issue dividends to just A ordinary shareholders or just A and B. So basically issue dividends in lieu of taking a salary to one or both of the founders, and not issue those dividends to investors at the same time. To be honest, investors hate that. Firstly, investors don't want you taking dividends out of the business. Investors want you swinging for the fences and, growing a great business and exiting. They don't want money leaving the business via dividends. Secondly, dividends can only be paid out of what's called distributable reserves, or in short, that means profit in the business. For the next few years, most startups in the early stages just aren't profitable at all. So there'll be nothing to distribute via dividends anyway. And thirdly, investors, if there is any distributable reserves and profits, investors, even though they probably only own 15, 20% between them, they don't want founders taking out 100% of the dividends. They want to pro rata get their percentage as well. So for lots and lots of reasons, it's almost certain your business will never create a dividend anyway. And even if it does, it's very unlikely that the investors will agree to you taking that out as a kind of alphabet shareholder, as it's called, alone, and not allowing the investors to participate as well. So for that reason, this is usually set to no. There are some quirky corner cases where it's useful though. So that's the second slider out of 7 done. The third item here is around founder details. I'll very quickly canter through this because I know we covered this in quite some detail in the last session. So you can see we've got one, this is for me as an admin user. Usually this would be your name. The first question we ask is your job title. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think. The second point is around when you started your employment with a company, when you became a director. So this should be the actual date you joined rather than today's date. Your notice period. So this is the period under which you have to give notice to the company and vice versa, in order to, when you resign. Doesn't cover things like gross misconduct and things like that. But this is the kind of default notice period in any other scenario. The default's 3 months, which I think is a nice balance, but it may be 1 month is appropriate or 6 months, depending on the business. The next item is the gross annual salary. Bearing in mind that this is going in the founder service agreement document, and this really means the gross annual salary that will be applied to you as a founder from the date you close the funding round. So it's not what is your salary today before you close the funding round. It is what will your salary be once you close the funding round. And sometimes those two things are quite different. Expenses limit. This is the amount that you can spend in a single transaction before you require board approval. Lots of founders think £100 is too low, you may want to change it to 200 or £1,000, whatever your investors would agree, really. You enter your work address as well, which can either be the company correspondence address, the registered address, any other address if you're working We Work every day or something else, or it can be your home address. Most people post-COVID are working from home, so whatever there is appropriate. Holiday allowance, uh, this is the amount of holiday you have as a contractual right within your founder service agreement. Most founders are probably laughing at the thought of taking 25 days holiday in a year. I know I am, but this is kind of a contractual right to holiday, and number of holiday days that can carry over. That's very similar and related, and the number of months into the next calendar year by which you must use any of those carried over days before they're just lost. All of these are fairly standard employment things for most founders. None of this makes too much difference because, as we all know, being a founder is a full-time and more commitment. The next item is around bonus and benefits. Here you indicate anything you get above and beyond a salary. So do you get healthcare? Do you get a bonus if you meet certain milestones? Are there any other benefits, a pension or whatever? So here you detail any bonus, any benefits, anything that you want included in your contract above and beyond a salary. The next section is around other allowed business interests. So by default, the paperwork assumes that you are dedicating all of your time to this business and you have no other business interests. If you do have anything that falls into that, maybe you're working a day a week as a contractor in order to keep the lights on in lieu of a salary from the business, whatever it happens to be, then you should declare that here. And it means that nobody can come after you for not dedicating 100% of your time. If you have any patents that you want to make it clear explicitly that you're allocating into the business, then you should detail the patents here. And similarly, any trademark. So quite often when you start a business, you will pick up a company name. You will do so before you've incorporated. You'll then apply for a trademark before you've even registered your company on Companies House. And then you'll go back retrospectively and you'll transfer the trademark from you owning it as an individual into the company itself. And the reason you do that, there are people, believe it or not, that look for every new company registration on Companies House and will go out and trademark the company name before you have the chance to do it. So it's best practice often to trademark first, register the company second, and then nobody can get in there. But that does mean you need to explicitly transfer the IP, the trademark of your company from the registration you have as an individual into the company, and this allows you to do it here. Finally, there's a section on excluded IP rights. So is there any IP that you own as an individual that you are explicitly not transferring into the company? So this might be something like, you own some source code that you produced before the company existed, the company is going to use, but you're not going to transfer. It may be, a patent that you own that you're not transferring into the business, or, a trademark or whatever. It's any IP can be mentioned here. For most businesses, investors want to see absolutely all IP transferred into the business, but there are the odd corner case where you've produced a patent 10 years ago that you're just not going to transfer in, and this is your opportunity to call out on an individual basis where that is the case. Board composition rules, will rattle through this one. This one's relatively straightforward to cover. So the first item here is when you close a funding round, we're going to create a set of board minutes that authorize on behalf of the board you doing a bunch of things when you close a funding round, like allotting new shares, potentially creating an option scheme, adopting the new articles of association, for example. So there's a bunch of actions you're going to take. And this is indicating where that board meeting will occur. Broadly, the two options are it's either going to occur on at your registered address or your correspondence address, and this address will be put at the top of those board meetings that we'll produce for you. You need to indicate what the quorum required for the board is. This means broadly that how many directors need to be present out of all the directors in order for the board meeting to be quorum, which means, if you don't have this recognized number of people, then you shouldn't hold a board meeting at all. It's not a recognized board meeting. So to give you an example, if you've only got one founder in your business, you will want the quorum to be one so you can hold a board meeting yourself. If there are three founders in your business, then you may decide between you that actually, in theory, you should have all three of you present, but you will allow a board meeting to occur if two out of the three people are present, in which case you would put two in this box here. The next item is around, will the board chairman have a casting vote? So if you've got an even number of people on your board, so if you've got, say, 2 directors or 4 directors, sometimes you can reach something called deadlock, where, if you imagine you've got 4 directors and 2 people vote for a specific item and 2 people vote against, then you can find that you've got 50-50, and actually to carry a board motion, you need 51% or more of your directors to vote, and it's 1 member, 1 vote. What this allows you to do is say, well, actually, in a position where we've got 2 people voting for something and 2 people voting against, the chairman's vote can count as effectively, it can pass, it can get you over that kind of deadlock situation. And that chairman has something called a casting vote. So if the chairman votes for something, even though it's 50-50, then that motion will go ahead. Quite often this is set as no, so that, you need to achieve a proper majority. But this is a nice way in where you've got even number of directors to kind of break that deadlock. It's a fairly maximum time between board meetings is an indication of what maximum period there is between each of the board meetings occurring. This is a protection for investors who will want to understand that, at least, 4 times a year, your company will hold a formal board meeting. This isn't just a meeting of the directors to have a chit chat and agree, monthly management meetings or whatever. This is a formal board meeting. So quite often, investors will want to see it. And usually, I think 4 strikes the right balance of having not a huge gap between each of the meetings, but also not having to have them, every 3 weeks or whatever, which would be too soon. The next item is very related as well. This is how many board meetings occur per year. The reason you've got both of these items is, you can imagine a scenario where, investors intend that there are, say, 26 board meetings a year, but the founders could say, right, well, we're going to have, 1 board meeting every day every working day over the next 2 months, and we're going to squeeze them into 2 months. That is not the intention that investors would imagine. So by having both of these parameters, a maximum time between board meetings and a minimum per year, they can be certain that, if these 2 parameters, there will be a minimum of 4 per year, and there'll be a maximum gap of 15 weeks between those. So it's just kind of sensible parameters to make sure that those board meetings are happening at a relatively regular cadence. Sometimes if you take investment from specific groups, so some of the SEI, SEIS funds, some of the angel networks, they will want you to create a post called an investor director. This is where a member or somebody that those groups nominate sits on your board. It's really interesting. There's two sections here. One is around investor director. One is around board observer. The first item here is around board observer. So a board observer is somebody that investment group nominates who sits on the board as an observer rather than a statutory director, which is really important. So what it means is that person, a board observer, cannot vote. So when there's a board meeting and the board directors are voting on something, the board observer does not participate in that vote, but they do get access to everything that is presented at board. So they get all of the board packs prior to the board, and they get to attend the board meeting as an observer. They can view everything, and actually they can give their opinion, so they can steer the company if they wish, but they don't get to formally vote. So a board observer is not quite as powerful as an investor director, but it still does give kind of eyes and ears to those investment groups on your board. The next item is around an investor director, and this is like a board observer, but the person does get to vote. So if there are 4 founders and 1 investor director, you're effectively have 5 people voting at every board meeting, and that investor director will participate in each of those votes. The reason why lots of groups don't like investor directors, it puts quite a weight on the shoulders of that investor director. It gives what are called fiduciary duties, or legal duties, onto that investor director. It creates some risk and liability for that investor director that doesn't appear with a board observer. So increasingly now we're seeing people wanting to put board observers, so they got eyes and ears, onto boards rather than investor directors. Phew. So that is everything on board composition and rules. The next slider we're going to talk through is around advanced round configuration. We're going to skip past Thunderbeam compatible paperwork. At some point in the near future, we've still got some legacy customers that are using this. At some point in the near future, this setting will disappear entirely. It's not useful anymore, so I won't dwell on it today. The next item is around you snooze, you lose. This is a very founder-friendly thing, so you should absolutely, unless you're forced otherwise by investors, you should leave this as yes. Effectively, what this means is if you have investor consent switched on within your funding round, and we'll come to those in a minute, if they're switched on, then by default, if you snooze, you lose is no, then when you ask for investor consent from all of your investors, you have to wait until you get to over 50% of investor shareholdings committing yes to a vote. And if people are away on holiday, or they're ill in hospital or whatever, and they don't vote or they can't vote, then you can't assume that they're abstaining. You can't assume anything of their kind of inaction. And it creates a bit of a burden on founders. It creates a hurdle to get over that 50%. When you switch on you snooze, you lose, which is now the default on the platform, it means that if you don't hear from investors within 2 weeks, you can assume that they are happy to consent to an action. So it just gives much more flexibility on those consent items. Broadly, it means usually that after 2 weeks, everybody who hasn't replied is de facto consenting to something. As long as more than 50% of people haven't said no to a specific action, then you can go ahead. So it's powerful, and it's very founder friendly, and it stops those kind of slowing down situations where people just aren't replying to consent. Funding round direct and loan treatment. So there are lots of ways that investors like to kind of insist founders deal with loans, and our paperwork gives you lots of optionality here. The first item on the list is, oh, and by the way, if you don't have a director's loan account, this doesn't matter in the slightest. It really doesn't matter. The default on the platform is, I believe, silent. So this means that the paperwork is silent. We don't mention director's loan account. It's kicked down the line in terms of how that loan is treated, so it's not explicitly mentioned. The next item, and this is the most founder friendly, is that you can repay any director's loan account from investment monies. Broadly, this means, say you're raising £100,000 and you've got a £10,000 director's loan. If you manage to have this setting on the platform through a funding round, then this means that you can repay that £10,000 from the £100,000. By the way, you shouldn't do that with EIS funds. There are esoteric rules on this, but you can repay directors' loan accounts from SEIS monies. You're not allowed to repay loans from EIS money. So make sure you're not tripping over that one. The third item is slightly less founder friendly, but still better than the last item. This is around whether this basically allows you to repay a director's loan account from free cash flow, but not from investment money. So broadly, when your company reaches profitability and you've got 10 grand of profit in the bank, you could repay your director's loan account from that £10,000 without any other authority. You're already authorized in the paperwork if your investors sign up to this. You're not allowed to repay in this third scenario. You're not allowed to repay the director's loan account from the investment money at all. The last item is capitalize, which is the most investor friendly and therefore the most founder unfriendly. And this basically means that you will be capitalizing your director's loan into the company equity within this funding round. Broadly, what it means is you've got a £10,000 loan. You're currently fundraising at 1.5 million. You've got to take your director's loan out, and this is a cashless transaction, but you convert your director's loan into equity, into £10,000 equity, but you do so at that £1.5 million valuation. So usually that's really unpleasant for founders. It's the least founder friendly of these options. Some investors, like SFC, for example, they will insist that you do it. Most investors will allow you to keep either silent or can be repaid from cash flow. If you don't have director's loan, this item is incredibly irrelevant. The next item is indicating whether you'll work in the business full time. We've already had a setting somewhere in the settings around whether you can have outside interests or not, but this is slightly different. This is basically confirming that you will be a full-time employee or not. For most founders, the answer is yes, I'm going to be a full-time and more employee. But sometimes you will keep doing a day job. You'll close the funding round. You'll do 2 days a week as a contractor to keep the lights on. In which point you're probably not full-time in the business, and you would indicate that here. Funding round investor consents. There are a couple of different options here. So within the shareholders agreement, if you indicate that you either want minimal or light or full investor consents, then within the shareholders agreement, there will be investor consents in place. Broadly, this means that if you want to undertake certain items, then you need to ask the consent of your investors. And normally it means you need at least 50% of shares owned by investors to consent to that action. Now, we've already spoken about you snooze, you lose, which helps you get around that a little bit. But broadly, that's true, that if 50% of investors disagree with an action, 50% of shareholdings owned by investors disagree with an action, you just can't undertake it. There's 4 different settings here, and it gets a little bit confusing, but none means that there are absolutely no investor consents at all. There's literally none. It's expunged from our paperwork. It's really unusual for investors to accept these. But that is, we had lots of requests for founders saying, I just want no mention of investor consents. Well, if that's the case, then none is the setting for you. Far more usual is minimal. This doesn't include a consent schedule at the back of the shareholders agreement, but it does give some really, really minimal protections to shareholders to investors in certain circumstances where it's incredibly reasonable that those investors are covered. The next choice is light. This is not the full-on investor consents. This does include a consent schedule within your shareholders agreement, but it's pared back to what we think a reasonable minimum is. And then you come to full investor consents. There's quite a few sets of that's quite comprehensive. There's a lot there. If you want to see the difference on these 4 settings, what is probably worth doing is creating whatever version you want to look at. So if you want to know the difference between, I don't know, minimal and none, for example, you can create a set of paperwork based upon the minimal consents. You can then download the PDF, the shareholders agreement. You can then go in and set to none. You can download the PDF. You can load both in Word as a PDF, but then convert them to Word. And then you can do a compare of the 2 documents, and you can see the differences across those 2 documents. Like I say, none is absolutely zero consents applying to investors at all. Minimal is our minimum viable set, but very, very thin. Light it has an investor consent schedule, which is, we think it's a minimal set of protections, assuming you want investor consents in place. And then full is everything. Full is what most of the SEIS and EIS funds would insist on. Phew. Include full warranties. And again, there's 2 choices here. There are you can either accept all the warranties, or you can accept a kind of slimmed down version of warranties. You can't select warranties equals none because frankly no investor would ever accept that. Um, we do have an article on our platform. I'm not going to include a link to it here, but there is an article on our platform which walks through what is a warranty, what is a disclosure process, why does it matter. It's really important that you take the warranty and disclosure process seriously. If you don't, then in theory, your investor can sue you. Imagine, one of the warranties says, and I'm going to paraphrase, the company's not being sued for anything. Imagine your business is being sued for, I don't know, copyright infringement or whatever. If you knew that and you didn't disclose it as a disclosure, then you could be sued for a breach of warranty. That has implications for you individually and for the business as a warrantor as well. And it's very unpleasant. Now, in reality, for startups, I've never once seen any founder be sued via a warranty claim. The reason is, most investors are putting £20,000, £50,000 into your business, and it's going to take an investor £50,000 to take you to court. So it's just disproportionately expensive to do so. Yeah, but for all of those reasons, I've never once seen somebody sued for a breach of contract under a warranty claim. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take it seriously. What you should do is read our article on warranty and disclosure, and then walk through the warranty schedule. Make sure you've had a very strong coffee, but walk through that warranty schedule within the shareholders agreement and work out if any of those warranties apply to you. And what you do, you read each of the warranties in turn. And for example, one of the warranties will say, and again, I'm paraphrasing, something like the business is not being sued by anybody. If you are being sued, then it's a pretty strong indication you need to disclose the details of that. If you're not being sued, then you don't need to do anything. You don't need to create a disclosure. You don't need to write anything. You can just skip past that warranty and sleep safely at night. Those are warranties and disclosures. Company information rights. There's a few choices here. Broadly, this gives you an obligation to update your investors on a routine basis. And there are a couple of choices here. You can click absent, which means you're never obliged to give your investors any updates at all. Or there's monthly, quarterly, and yearly. And these are indicating, quarterly, for example, means that you need to update your investors every quarterly with an update. As an investor myself, I want updates. I don't want them monthly. I think that's a distraction for you. And honestly, I'm not going to read a monthly update. I think yearly is a long time in a startup. I think that's too long. So I think quarterly is the perfect cadence. It's just long enough for something interesting to happen. And it's not too long that the company could have disappeared in that year. As a founder, I would, as an investor in startups myself, I would urge you as a founder to update your investors anyway. I think, if you're going to come to do another funding round, investors are much more likely to invest if you've been updating them. And also, you might have asks of your investors. You might want introductions into a certain type of partner or customer type. You might be looking for a fractional CMO or a CTO or whatever it happens to be. If you ask your investors, they are very motivated usually to help you. If you don't ask your investors, they can't help you. So I think quarterly is a lovely balance here. For some reason, lots of founders get animated on this one, and they're like, no, we don't want an obligation to update founders, and we don't want that at all, in which case you can select absent. The next item is around including certified B Corporation compliant articles. I'm not going to go too much into B Corp itself. B Corp is quite a big movement. There are lots of for good, mission-driven businesses who have a purpose beyond just making profit, and they will want to bake that into their kind of essence of being via something called B Corp. You will probably know whether you want to be B Corp compliant or not. If you do, then you can indicate that here. We don't do the heavy lifting. Believe me, B Corp is a lot of work. We don't do the heavy lifting, but what we do, we make life a little more straightforward. We include a section, it's right at the back of the articles, which make your articles of association B Corp friendly. So they include the wording that you need to include within your B Corp in your articles to be B Corp friendly. You've still got to do all of the heavy lifting yourself, but it hopefully takes a little bit of pain away. You will hopefully know whether you want to be B Corp friendly or not. If you don't know, take a look and yeah, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Finally, finally nearly there on this page. Penultimately, we come to leaver provisions. Broadly, there are three choices here. Lots of founders again get animated on this one. Broadly, this means that if you select none here, it means that the shares you own in the business. So you might own 100% of the shares pre-funding round if you're a sole founder. It means that even if you close a funding round, you take on £1 million today and you quit the business tomorrow, you're going to still own, whatever you end up owning, 80% of the shares after a funding round or whatever. So if you leave leaver provisions equals none, there's no vesting attached to your shares. No matter what you do, no matter how you leave, no matter how quickly that happens, you will own all of your shares if you quit. It is really unlikely that your investors, if they're in any way sophisticated, will accept that. And I've kind of indicated why they won't want to accept that. If you do £1 million funding, close £1 million funding round today, and you quit tomorrow, I, as an investor, don't want you to own your 80% of the shares that you own post-dilution. It's just completely unreasonable. Therefore, you fall back to one of two different types of vesting. These are the defaults on the platform. So our default is standard. We've got an article which we link to here, which gives details around what that exactly entails. But broadly, our standard terms, it breaks you down into either a very bad lever, at which point you're going to lose all your shares, a bad lever, a voluntary lever, or a good lever. And so that's one side of the table. And then it has the period over which you leave. So if you leave within the first year, you're going to end up losing more of your shares than if you leave between, the second and third year, or third and fourth year, and so on. So the better type of lever and the longer you've been in the business, broadly, the more of your shares you keep. Any shares that you are losing, subject to this vesting provision, will be done using something called reverse vesting using deferred shares. So we will, or you will take a percentage, say you're going to lose 20% of your shares, for example. You take 20% of your shares and they are converted to deferred shares, which are broadly junk. Deferred shares don't vote, they don't get a dividend, they don't participate on an exit. So those shares are absolutely junk. Yeah, and that's what vesting means. Our standard provisions we think are fair. You may want to tweak some of the percentages, or you may want to flip to BVCA. BVCA is the British Venture Capital Association. They have a standard set of share vesting. I think in our platform it is the shares vest for over 4 years with a 1-year cliff. So you earn nothing in the first year, then you accelerate that first year, and then it's pro rata up until the end. Once you've owned your shares, once you've vested over 4 years, you own all of your shares, and as long as you're not a very bad lever, then you retain all those shares, even if you quit. That is very much going to be a negotiation with your investors, even if, no matter who your investors are, they will probably have a fixed view on this. The last item is a percentage shareholding required to allow an SSA change. Broadly, this means what percentage of your shareholdings need to vote in order to change that subscription and shareholder agreement. There is a caveat here, which is that if you are removing a right on anybody, or you're adding an obligation to them, they need to sign the subscription and shareholder agreement. So I don't think this is particularly useful. In most scenarios, in virtually all scenarios, if you're changing your subscription and shareholder agreement, then you're going to need 100% signature anyway, because the only reason you'd be changing that document is to either remove a right and protection from somebody, or increase an obligation on somebody, in which point they've got to sign the new document anyway explicitly. Warranty limitations. There are 5 items here. I will walk through each one individually. I hope everybody's had a lot of coffee, because these are quite complex. We've already mentioned briefly the warranty and disclosure process. And again, there's an article here that will talk through in quite some detail around what a warranty is, how you disclose against it, and why it matters. These numbers all change items within the shareholders agreement. So if I change a founder warranty liability limit from 20,000 to 10,000, that's going to change part of the shareholders agreement. Let's walk through them individually. So the individual founder warranty liability limit, this is the amount that I, as an individual founder, have at risk if I don't properly follow the warranty and disclosure process. So, one of the warranties, for example, is the company is not being sued. And if the company is being sued and I don't disclose that, then an investor could sue the company and me as an individual. They would usually do both if they can. And the founder individually could be sued. They're risking up to £20,000 if the investor wins in court. So this is the amount that you are personally, an individual founder is personally risking. Obviously, there's lots of caveats to that. If you follow the warranty and disclosure process, it won't matter. If you don't follow the process, it relies on an investor suing you, which is incredibly rare, and it relies on them winning in court as well. But for most purposes, this should be painful. So it should be an incentive for you as a founder to take the warranty and disclosure process seriously. But it shouldn't bankrupt you. It shouldn't be £2 billion or something ridiculous, because you would be bankrupt. You would lose your personal home. It would be, it would be awkward. So for most intents and purposes, a warranty liability of £20,000, it's painful. You don't want to trip over it, but it's not going to bankrupt you probably. The next is the minimum aggregate warranty claim level. So this is the total claim the level of a total claim that must be reached before people can sue you. So if there are 5 claims of £1,000 each, you would bundle them together. That's what the aggregate means. But you are only at £5,000, so you couldn't be sued if it was set to £10,000. However, if there were 10 claims of £10,000, you could absolutely be sued because it gets over that aggregate warranty claim level. The next is all around, what's the minimum amount for an individual claim? So, if you are being sued by somebody and you didn't disclose it, but you're only being sued for £500 in a small claim court, then really the impact of that is going to be £500. That would be the claim that the investor would make against you, and it wouldn't be over this threshold. So they couldn't include that in their minimum aggregate warranty claim level because it's too small. This is called the de minimis. It's too small for the investor to be able to sue under. Phew. One of the warranties talks about a capital commitment. So you need to disclose to investors any capital commitment, any single capital commitment, which is committed to buy a printing press, legally obliged to buy a printing press for, say, £100,000, but I haven't yet paid the money, then I would need to disclose that within the warranties. You don't need to disclose anything below the level of £10,000 in this case. The last one here, the warranties change the terms of employment. This means that you need to disclose to investors where you have promised to make a change to an employment contract but not yet implemented it. So, if I've got somebody who works in the business, they're currently employed at £40,000, I've promised them they'll be on £60,000 when we close the funding round, then I need to disclose that against the relevant warranty. Because they trigger that, somebody's going to be paid at more than £50,000. So that one's pretty straightforward as well. So these two are fairly unique. They change the individual warranties in the document. These set the limits and the rules around the circumstances under which an individual can sue you under a warranty claim.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to add specific disclosures. So you do that in step 1. You scroll down, so it will be the step after the warranty limitation. So we have a video on this section as well. You would scroll down to specific disclosures. This is the final one. And the first thing I would do is read our warranties and disclosure article that talks about the whole process, why you do it, why it's important for you as a founder, but also why it's important for investors, and it's required as a process in funding rounds. So you can read through that and understand how it all works. The next thing I would do is download your subscription and shareholders agreement. So you can go to Schedule 4, and which is the warranty section, and read through all the warranties that you may need to make disclosures against. So I'll show you how to do that in a second. Just before we get into that, the kind of high level is that a warranty is a contractual statement of fact made by you to every investor. So you're basically giving them confidence and ensuring to them that all the information and facts you've provided about your business are true, complete, and accurate. And if you think about it from an investor perspective, there'll be lots of areas of the business that they don't have much information about. But they might be putting £200,000 into your business, but they haven't seen how you've pulled together the business plan, the accuracy of the accounts, whether there's any legal action against the company, or other kind of contracts that you may have referenced, sales contracts, or anything to do with kind of advisors or employees and things like that. So that's why this process is so important to them. So what you'll do is download your subscription and shareholders agreement, as I say. So that's in the intelligent data room. You'll see that in folder 2. So that's where all the investment documentation is. So here's the subscription and shareholders agreement. If I was you, I would download that here, read through it in detail, but just for speed, I'm going to fly down to Schedule 4 here, which is the warranty section. So these are all the statements of fact that you need to read through, and you can see there's lots and lots here. But it doesn't matter. Let's just say that 3.3, I need to make a disclosure against. This is not, true for our business. I would then go back to the funding round, back to specific disclosures, and then I would make a new disclosure. So I would go, it's warranty number 3.3. And let's say we're being sued for a breach of contract, save that disclosure, and then I've done it. Now that will then pull into the disclosure letter. So you may have seen that when I was in folder 2. So that's one of the other documents we produce. We have this disclosure letter here. Now there are these general disclosures. These will be in there as standard, so you can read through those. More information about that in the article. But the key point here is now there is this specific disclosure section made in relation to the warranties, and you can see my warranty number 3.3, we are being sued for breach of contract. Now, you may also want to reference something, so it might be an email or the contract. What I would do there is go back into the intelligent data room, go to folder 4, disclosed items, and then create the folder. So it might be legal contract, create that folder, and the platform will number them automatically. So if I click into that folder, we have folder 4.1, legal contract, and then I could drag in whatever relevant information is required. I can then go back to the funding round now, go back to my disclosure. I'm going to need to edit this now and say see folder 4.1 legal contract. Save that, and then in real time that should update the disclosure letter. So jump back into the disclosure letter, and there we go, see folder 4.1 legal contract. So that is how the process works. So you would go through all of those warranties, make any disclosures required, and then that will pull into this disclosure letter that both you and all the investors sign. I would also make sure before you close the round, or just before you close the round, that you go back to these disclosures and make sure they are all true and accurate and complete, in case anything's happened in that period of time, maybe in between you creating the first disclosures and then actually closing the funding round. But yeah, that's that process.
Step one is fully complete. So I've been through, and to be honest, this has just got test data in, but every one of these sections has now got the settings, and the platform doesn't let you access step two until you've completed everything in step one. So we make sure we've got everything we need in order for you to start. The very first thing you need to do in step two really is invite somebody else or some other people to join the platform. Broadly, there's two choices here. You can invite, there's lots of choices, but you can invite somebody as entry level, which means they get a limited set of access. So they would only, within your data room, they would only get access to entry level. They don't get access to all the other folders. They can't see your term sheet, or they can't see the term sheet with the cap table in at least. They can't see your investment documentation. They can't see anything else. So if you invite somebody entry level, they get access to this almost empty folder. If you don't invite somebody entry level, then they get full access and they can access pretty much everything here. The reason you'd want to use entry level is if you think somebody's committed, they want to see your pitch deck and your financial model, which you want to hide behind an NDA, but you don't want to give them kind of full access to your data room. You don't have to use it at all if you decide, well, actually, we're just going to go for it. That's fine. Let's add a new user to the platform. So I am going to add 17, 11, 21. So I am going to add, this is my email address I will use. And we will say they're an SCIS investor with ordinary shares. Now, if you want to invite somebody entry level, i.e. not full access, then you would just enter 0 here, and it's just a holding. I am going to enter, I don't know, we're going to buy 10 shares. So we'll skip the entry level for now, but I thought it useful to introduce what that feature does. You can see I am, that's my details. I'm buying 10 shares at a complete total of £150. So that is not the biggest funding round ever, but it will do for this purpose. What I can do now is keep adding people. If I scroll to the bottom here, you can see I can add yet another different person who's having shares. I can have maybe an existing shareholder who wants to participate in this funding round as well. I can add an SPV or nominee. So let's have a look at this. This allows me to, of course, we're on staging. It doesn't have all the details, but if you're investing using an Odin SPV or a Cedars or Crowdcube or Mara, who's our favorite, or even a vested SPV, then you can enter the details here. If you're one of your founders are participating in the funding round, you can do that as well. Those kind of things. It's worth mentioning you can't move on to step 3 until we've invited at least one person. And do remember to click the send invitation emails here. Quite often customers say, nobody's had an invite from me. Well, yeah, that's the button you need to press. And once you press that, you can see we've now got access to step 3. So you can see this person has been invited, but they haven't started onboarding yet. So they haven't signed an NDA or the FCA disclaimer or the term sheet. Yeah, and I've just had the email through here, so let me drag this across. And you can see that this is saying that Sam's invited you to blah, 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 and accept invitation. So I'm going to copy this link. This is where it gets a little bit confusing. So I've got another browser here, and this browser is Safari. So whenever I'm in Safari, I'm an investor, and when I'm in Chrome, I am a founder. So I'm going to accept the invitation. I am just going to make my password. And there we are. What I'll do here is just show you what the investors see when they're invited to the platform. I thought that would be useful too. So the first thing, we capture a bunch of information from each of your investors. They can enter their mobile number if they want. We don't use it for any purpose on the platform, but it does potentially go. No, I don't think we use it for anything at all ever. There's the national insurance number. This is useful if your investor's an SEIS or EIS investor, then this will be useful for the SCIS1 and SCIS3 or EIS3 process, it automatically populates that. Because we're on the staging service, it's just put a bunch of test data there, so we'll just save that. They then have to enter a signature. They can either generate a signature online, and we'll do that version, so that makes a nice quick signature. And then the first thing they have to do is sign the NDA. So they have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, really standard two-way NDA. You can see it's between the company that we've been invited to and me as an individual. So I'll just scroll to the bottom of the page and enter my password. That's good. And if we flip back to the screen, you can see this is the screen as a founder again. If I refresh the page, you can see, oh, great, you've signed the NDA. We're currently onboarding with the FCA disclaimer and then the term sheets to come. So again, back as the investor, I get a couple of choices here. So if I am genuinely an international investor, I can just click the button there. They are exempt from the financial promotion order, and that means they don't have to certify as a type of investor. If they are a UK individual, then they need to certify either as a certified high net worth individual, and they need to enter details here, or as a self-certified sophisticated investor. They need to be one or the other. I will just find the easiest way to get through this. I say I am a high net worth and I earn 200,000 a year. There you go. That will make things nice and easy. Based upon that, it's created a form which kind of just reiterates what I've just said, and I need to sign this form. So I am going to enter my password again. This screen is the ugliest screen on FounderCatalyst. It's actually mandated in law, so the changes to the regulations mean that we have to display this screen with this data in this manner, so we do it. If the investor doesn't want to proceed, then they'll be kicked out of the process. If they do, which I assume they do, it will take us onto the term sheet. And again, if I flip back to seeing the founder view, you can see we've now signed the NDA, the FCA. So this is a really lovely, if you've got 20 investors here, it's a really lovely way of tracking where each of your investors are in the process. So anyway, back as the investor, they can scroll through the term sheet. You can see details of, this is the cap table before the funding round, this is what's happening in the funding round, and this is the cap table post-funding round. So I'm going to go ahead and sign this. And as an investor, there's not actually anything else for me to do at the moment. I can click around, so I can go and have a look into the data room. I can look at, you know, the subscription and shareholder agreement. If I want to take a look at that, I can scroll around this and have a read, but there's nothing else for me to sign. There's nothing else to do. If I refresh this screen, you can see at the moment, before the investor was fully onboarded, we couldn't lock the documents for signature. But if I refresh the screen, you can now see that I've only invited a single investor as a founder, and they are now fully onboarded. So there's nothing making me lock the funding round for signing at the moment. If I wanted, I could go back and change some settings. So I can still go back into step one. I can change anything I like here. I can go ahead and invite further people. So I can invite another investor, or maybe, you know, I've realized that I'm only investing £1.50 and that's not quite enough. So I'm going to invest 1,500 quid. So I'll go ahead and click save there. And what that will do a few things. So actually that will go ahead and update all of the documents in the data room. So anything relevant to that change will go ahead and change in the documents. And again, if I want, I can continue inviting people or amending settings, or I can just lock the round for signing. Let's do that now. What this effectively means is, it does a few things. Firstly, it prevents me as a founder from amending any more settings on the platform. So I'm not allowed to make any changes. And that is because people, as soon as I click this button, everybody will be told to sign the documents. And obviously it doesn't make sense if I ask people to sign a document and then the documents are changing constantly. That doesn't make any sense at all legally. So When I click this, it prevents me from making any changes on the platform, so the documents are stable, and then everybody gets emailed and said, go sign your documents. Now, in this case, there's only two people signing. There's me as a founder, and I'm across the bottom here, and then you get investors that are also asked to invest. But sometimes when you look around for signing, it could be 50 people are being told to sign documents. So you want to be careful when you do it. When I click this button, it's going to give me a bunch of warnings. I can't remember what they are, but there'll be a bunch of warnings around things that are potentially wrong in my funding round. And you should make sure you read this and digest before you continue. So actually, it's warning me about two things. The first thing it's warning me is that I haven't made any disclosures yet. So within the subscription and shareholder agreement, there's 10, 15 pages of what are called warranties. And as a founder, I need to read each of those warranties and make sure if they are a statement of fact or not. And then create a disclosure against anything, against anything which I believe I need to. Let me just cancel this and we'll jump back into the funding round to show you what that means. So you create your disclosures or your warranty, you create your disclosures against warranties on the last tab here. So if we scroll to the bottom here, we can add a new disclosure. I can't remember any warranty numbers, but we'll say it's 11.1 and blah, blah, blah. There we are. And I'll save that disclosure. And then if we go back to closing the funding round, you can see it doesn't warn us anymore. We've created at least one disclosure against a warranty. So the platform's like, okay, you've clearly considered it. The second warning it's given us here is, and this is probably the most frustrating error we see on the when people are closing funding rounds. People just believe that their nominal value is a default of 1. And actually, lots of people have created a nominal value of 1 penny rather than £1, or they've done a share split to change the nominal value. So this page is just saying, hang on, you've got a nominal value above £100,000, which is very, very unusual, and therefore it's probably indicative that there's a potential problem with your nominal value on the platform. And if we, if I just click on this button here, this takes you to your filings on your company. And we could go and look in the confirmation statement here, for example, or one of the last SHO ones, and we can tell what the correct nominal value is. If it was incorrect, then again, we'll cancel this. We'll go into company. We can change our nominal value to what would be a more reasonable figure of 0.0001. There you go. Something like that would be expected for that number of shares. And then again, we'll go back in here. We'll lock the documents for signature. And it's just worked this time because we've resolved the 2 issues that we've been warned about. So as a investor, let me go and find the email. I have now been warned. Let me have a quick. Yeah, there you go. So I've just got the email through now, and this is to the investors. It's saying you have 2 documents to sign, for example, Architects Limited. So what's interesting is the investors have just 2 documents to sign. They need to sign the disclosure letter and the subscription and shareholders agreement. So they need to sign those 2 documents. The founders need to sign a whole bunch of documents. So they need to sign their IP assignment, their founder service agreement, the disclosure letter, the subscription and shareholder agreement. They sign the board minutes, authorizing the funding round from a board perspective. They also, because the founder is the only shareholder in the business, they also have to sign a special resolution to close the funding round too. So you can see, if I scroll, you can see over on the left here, we can click in here. This gives us the set of documents that I need to sign. And as a founder, if I want, I can click on this button here. We can scroll down and we can look at the board minutes. We can look at any of the documents we want. Probably the most common question I get at this point is, well, hang on, the document says TBC and the chairman says TBC as well. Don't worry, both of these, when I sign the document, it will put the right date in, and it will also put the my name in there as well, and we'll see that in a minute. So anyway, I'm not going to review all of those documents. I'm just going to sign those as a founder. And again, if we scroll down here, you can see that I've now, as a founder, signed all the documents I need to, but the investor needs to sign 2 documents still. Now, what you can do, it's like herding cats. You can imagine if you've got 20 investors, sometimes it's really painful. So we've got a useful nudge button here, which just chases everybody for a signature if they haven't already done so. If I flip around now to the investor page again and click refresh, you can see we've got 2 documents to sign here. And again, they can, if they want, they can open the disclosure letter. That will tell you, there you go. You can see my blah, blah disclosure that I typed earlier. But yeah, this is the disclosure letter. And again, we could click the SSA if we wanted to review that. What I'm going to do though is select all, and I am just going to sign the 2 documents. Before I sign this, it is worth mentioning, if you find something wrong at this point, so at the moment we've got, the founders have signed, it could be all the founders have signed and all but one of the investors have signed, it doesn't really matter. If you found something wrong on your paperwork, so, an investor's dropped out or one wants to join at the last minute, or you've noticed something else is wrong, then you can click on the cancel signing process. This rolls you all the way back to defining. So we strip everybody's signatures if they've applied them. You can then make any changes necessary and then relock the round for signing. Obviously, if you've already had 20 people sign and you do this, it's all a bit painful for both you and them. So you only want to do this if you really need to. However, we're not going to do it this time. We are going to let the investors go ahead and sign their documents. And on the screen here, you can see that the investors automatically being prompted to transfer money. So we know they've signed their documents. So we're now saying, right, you need to pay £1,500, which is thankfully the right amount, to this bank with this account number, with this IBAN and SWIFT. So we nudge, as soon as they've signed the documents, we nudge your investors to pay up, to transfer the money to you. What we also do ask them to do though, we send them an email, which is kind of a double nudge straight away. And this says, all paperwork has now been signed. It's time to transfer your investment amount. Bank details are shown in section 4.2 of the subscription and shareholder agreement. So what we don't do is email your bank details around. That feels like incredibly the wrong thing to do. So we're now pointing them to look at your subscription and shareholder agreement, which includes all of your bank details. So we nudge them on the screen as soon as they've signed the documents, and we nudge them via email to pay the money. So that is it from the investor point of view. There's nothing for them to do other than transfer the money. Again, if I refresh the screen now as a founder, you can see we're now on step 4. So there's no way of going back. We are now, we'll now say we've got the money from the investor. And by the way, most investors don't transfer the money that quickly, but we'll say we've now got the money from the investor. And we will go ahead and mark that as received. There's also a dropped out button. So it is not unheard of. If you've got 20 investors in a funding round, it's not unheard of that an investor will legally sign the documents. They'll go, great, I've pledged my £1,500 or whatever it happens to be, and then they don't end up transferring the money. And if that's the case, you mark them as dropped out. We'll, in theory, they've got a legally binding contract and they're obliged by law to transfer you the money. In practice, you're not going to sue somebody for £1,500 investment. If you drop them out, then we'll remove them from your cap table, we'll revoke their access and things like that. So they don't have access to your company anymore. And you can write it down to experience. It's, like I said, it's not unheard of in big funding rounds. There's potentially or usually one person that may or may not transfer the money, which is frustrating, but it happens. So your job as a founder, if you've got 20 investors here, usually those, that investment will be dripped over a few days. It will be unlikely for you to receive it in one day. But when you do get money from an individual investor, you just click the mark as receive button. And then we mark a table in the database which captures what date the investment was received. It's worth mentioning at this point, there is a type of funding round called a dual round, which is where you receive both SEIS and DIS investment on the same day. That is nerve-wracking. So the first thing to say is don't receive SEIS and EIS on the same day. What I meant to say is you receive SEIS and EIS within the same funding round. One of the rules of SEIS and EIS is that if you issue EIS shares on the same day as any SEIS shares, then you make any of those SEIS shares ineligible for SEIS relief. You have to recategorize them as EIS investors, which is really, really, really painful. So imagine you are raising, say, £500,000. You're raising 250 via SEIS and 250 via EIS. Then what we would urge you to do is communicate off platform to the investors. So send them an email and say, right, we are going to email everybody when it is time to transfer any SEIS money, and do not transfer any EIS until we warn you to do so. And then you get everybody to transfer their SEIS money today and tomorrow or whatever. You leave it a day to make sure you've had all of your SEIS money, and then you email your EIS investors and say, great, now it's time, it's good to go. You're good to transfer your EIS money. We also warn people on the platform. So if you're doing a dual round, i.e. SEIS and EIS in the same funding round, we send out a different email. We send out an email which says, we can see there's a dual round going on. Do not transfer any money. Nobody transfer any money at all until you hear from the founder. And that then allows you to manually orchestrate that process. So you get all of your SEIS investment, you check you've got it, you make sure you've got no EIS, you wait a day, and then you tell your EIS investors. It's really, really important you follow that. If you don't, like I say, you're in the process of destroying some of your investors' SEIS relief, which is going to be awkward. We will mark this as received. So what effectively I'm doing here, I'm telling the platform that we've received the money on behalf of, we've received the money in the bank, and we're also giving our permission for the platform to sign a share certificate on behalf of the founders. We'll give this a few seconds. It's closed the funding round now, so it's doing its thing. Oh, it's already done it. There you go. And you can see, we've closed the funding round. We've raised an amazing sum of £1,500 at a £1.5 million valuation, and it was closed today, and it has investor consent switched on, and there is one investor. So it's basically saying the funding round is done. What I can do, from here we can look at the cap table, and you can see, there you go, we've got 100 shares going to the new investor here, and they invested 1,500 quid under SEIS, and that equates to 0.1% of the company. We can go into the data room, and we can still root around and have a look in the initial funding round. I can download the share certificate, or I can download the subscription. I can download any of the documents basically from that funding round. There is a real quirk when it comes to share certificates in funding rounds where there's only one founder. So I told you, my first most annoying thing in funding rounds is that the nominal values are wrong, and you should go and check that your nominal value is right before you close. The second most annoying question or amusing question we get is everybody sees this part and says, and you can see it says, so-and-so is the registered holder of 100 ordinary shares of a penny, in this case, a fraction of a penny each. And lots of founders log support tickets and say, well, hang on, it's not a pair, it's not 0.0001. They paid £10 a share. This is the nominal value of each share, not the amount paid. So the share certificate doesn't detail the amount that your investor has paid. Either it doesn't detail how much they're paying total or per share. That number, 0.0001, is always the nominal value of the share. So yeah, don't panic. It is right. The platform's done the right thing. the other important and interesting thing is, if you have more than one founder in your company, then the platform will automatically sign the share certificate via two founders. It'll automatically go out. It will put two individual names, one either side, and it will sign the document on behalf of both of the founders. And that's in line with the Companies Act. If there's only one founder on the platform, then we can't do that. Obviously, we can't sign on behalf of two people. And best practice says that the share certificate should be signed by a founder and witnessed by an independent third-party adult. Hence why we don't sign your name on the platform if you're issued this as a sole founder. You need to print this out, and it's all very manual and horrible, but you need to print it out or get somebody else to DocuSign it or whatever. You sign it in the presence of somebody else, and they enter their name, address, and occupation here as well. It's really painful, but it's the rules, I'm afraid. So that is the first funding round done. So what can we do on the platform there? Well, lots of people who have closed a funding round want to issue an option scheme. To do that, you can do that here. Firstly, you need to authorize an option scheme and then go through it's quite a similar process to a funding round, really. You invite people to the platform, option holders and things like that. The other choice is we can go into the funding rounds and we can create a different funding round type. So let me walk through what these different rounds are. So if we want, we can create a full initial funding round, i.e. we're going to create a new shareholder agreement, new articles of association and things like that. So we do a whole new funding round. We can keep the existing terms. So rather than creating a subscription and shareholder agreement and amending your articles, we're simply going to use something called a subscription and adherence agreement. So none of your legal terms change, but it's another priced round. We can do a new terms round. So a full initial funding round again would create a new founder service agreement and IP assignment and those kind of things. If you do a new terms round, then we don't create those two documents. We just create a new subscription and shareholder agreement and articles of association embodying your new terms. By far my favorite and by far the most elegant way of fundraising, I think, is an agile round. Now, because in the initial funding round, you can see here, we didn't authorize any agile shares. So we didn't say, right, we're going to allow people to raise agile afterwards. So we don't automatically have the ability to open an agile round. If we'd have added those details into the initial paperwork, we can just scroll down here, click on start an agile funding round, and off we go. Literally within 2 minutes, we can be taken on investment. That would have been great. Unfortunately, that's not the position we're in because we didn't authorize it. You have to then authorize an agile round. And let's just go through it here. We've got a few minutes, I think. Let's go through here and see how it looks. So you can see we're authorizing an agile round. How much do you want to raise? So we'll say we're going to raise, I don't know, a chunk of change. We want the minimum share price to be £10. That'll be that many shares. And we want to be able to raise agile shares until the 17th of August. We'll finish the authorization process and we can now review the documents if we want, so we can look at the documents that have been created. However, we're just going to crack on with that. So you can see now I'm going to sign my documents. I've got 2 emails. There's a consent letter, which I'm signing on behalf of the company. And the reason we need to do that is because our previous funding round had investor consent switched on, and there's a shareholder resolution. And that's because I, as a founder, am a shareholder in my own right. So I will we'll go ahead. We've authorized that as a founder. And you can see here that the founder owns the vast majority of the shares. So actually, we've already got consents from a shareholder resolution point of view. It's already approved from a shareholder resolution point of view. But we don't have investor consent yet, because even though that this investor down here only owns 0.1% of the company, they own 100% of the investor shares. So if I flip back to my investor account here, you can see we've got an investor consent letter to sign. Again, you can see a copy of what it says. Very good. And I'm just going to sign this. You'll notice that they're not being asked to sign the shareholder resolution, and that's because the founders already signed the shareholder resolution. They've reached the number of signatures required, and therefore they don't need to sign. So if we go back to here and refresh, we've now completed the Agile authorization. If we scroll to the bottom, sorry, here we are. It's automatically opened an Agile funding round. And yeah, this is an Agile funding round. It's orders of magnitude more elegant than a full funding round. I mean, we may as well, since we've got a bit of time, we may as well talk through what this looks like. So I'm going to create, actually, for ease of use, I'm just going to invite the same. I'm being lazy today. I'm going to invite exactly the same investor to invest a bit more. So this time I'll say we're investing under EIS. We're going to do it today, and yeah, we're going to buy 10 shares this time, being extravagant. It's done the calculation as well. You can see here, it's going to invite the investor to the platform. So if I refresh, it's refreshing. So as every time you invite even an existing investor to the platform, we go through the financial promotion rules for you, and that is just really to protect, to ensure you're doing the right thing. Again, we've got to sign this document. This is all looking very familiar at this point, I'm sure. Again, we're signing a term sheet for this part of the funding round. And the funding round is literally just an adherence agreement. So if we open this, so I can show you how very, very slim it is. It is a couple of pages of text, and that is literally it. So it basically says, I'm going to transfer you this money. You're going to give me, and I'm going to do so to this bank account. You're going to give me this many shares, and that's that. It really is the most straightforward document ever. It's 4 pages, and that includes pretty much a blank first page and a blank last page, all but. So we're going to go ahead and sign that. And that is it. And again, we need to transfer the £100 this time. So if we flip back to the Agile funding round, it looks slightly different. So you can see that we can track that the investor has signed the consent, signed the term sheet, signed the adherence agreement. And if I've got the money already, then I can just sign this. And that is it. We've closed, you can see we've closed that single investment in, I don't even know, less than 5 minutes, that's for sure. Now, the beauty of Agile is we can invest 10 different people into this Agile funding round. So if I scroll down here, I can add just 10 people, and one person could sign off and pay today. One could do it tomorrow, one the day after. It's not like a full funding round where everybody has to sign all the documents and complete pretty much at the same time. In an Agile funding round, this Agile funding round could be open for, well, we've said it can be open until August 2026. So we can be raising over the next 9 or 10 months or whatever it is, from 100 different investors, and each of those individual investments is decoupled. So there's no terrifying big bang of having to kind of line up all of those investors at the same time. So hopefully that brings to life how elegant an Agile funding round as well is as well. So what I wanted to cover just quickly is what admin you are required to do when you close a funding round. And it does depend what type of funding round you've closed. In any event, you need to file something called an SHO1, and we've got a great article on that. The SHO1 is a notification to Companies House that you've allotted new shares, you've issued new shares. So yeah, you need to make sure you've filed that. If you are issuing shares under a full price round, or indeed any other funding round that amends or updates your articles of association, then you also need to file your articles of association with Companies House as well. In order to do so, you need to aggregate at least 75% of shareholding of your share special resolution. So basically, take all of the special resolutions out of the funding round, put them in one PDF, and attach them to the articles. And again, we've got an article on walking through in mind-numbing detail how you update those articles, update Companies House with your newly created articles of association. You must do that. If you have done a share split before a funding round, then you've got to be careful on your ordering here. You'll also want to file the SHO2, a backdated SHO2 with Companies House to notify Companies House of that. And then finally, if you've issued SEIS or EIS shares, then you need to go through another process. So the SEIS process or the EIS process involves starting this by submitting something called an SEIS1. We've got a guide down here. So if you scroll down on the left-hand side of the menu, there's a document here which walks through in lots and lots of detail on how to undertake this process. We help you to the maximum extent possible. We've automated as much as possible of this process. It still is a little bit clunky, but yeah, you need to follow this process. What makes this process particularly painful is that you need to do an SEIS1 or EIS1 for every single day you have issued shares. So if you do an agile round and you've got 10 different investors and you've taken money on 10 different days, then you need to do 10 different SEIS1s. You also need to do, even if you've had 3 investors on the same day, but they're getting slightly different share classes, so A ordinaries, B ordinaries, C ordinaries, if they're all getting them under SEIS, and I'm not sure why you do that, but if they do, then you need to again do 3 different compliance statements, 1 for each different share class, even though they're on the same day. And again, you can't use the same SEIS1 for EIS shares. You need to do what's called an EIS1 instead. As a prerequisite for doing that process, you will need to go to your cap table and download, we call it an SEIS, EIS1 spreadsheet. And this is a summary of all of the investments you've had. Let me just open a copy of this. This is a summary of every SEIS and EIS investment that you've ever made. And you can see we've made 1 investment for today, and that's 100 shares at £1,500. And then under EIS, you've got, this is the 2nd investment we made under an agile funding round. So when you do an SEIS1, you need to carve this sheet up. If you made 10 investments on different days, we would have 10 different blocks down here. You need to carve this sheet up and only submit to HMRC the parts you need. It's a really, really clunky process. On the bright side, once you've submitted it to HMRC and it's been approved, they will send you a unique number related to this investment, and it's very straightforward from there. All you do is go into the relevant part of the cap table, go into this part here, and this is for the SEIS, for example. We would generate an SEIS3 form. Of course we can't, because we haven't entered my own national insurance number. This is the benefit of your investors putting their national insurance number. Anyhow, if they'd have entered a national insurance number onto the platform, we would enter that unique reference number from Companies House, from HMRC, and that would then automatically create all of the details you need on that SEIS3 or EIS3 form.